Good evening, everyone. Hope you can all see the screen, that we're sharing. If there's any technical difficulties that pop up, just do let us know. So I am your speaker, Thinuri Jayatilake. Welcome to the FinPower Hub webinar titled Financial Freedom, Breaking Stereotypes. To tell you a little bit about FinPower Hub, this program is a part of International Women's History Month and focuses on making women financially wise and independent. But regardless of gender, we at First Capital launched this initiative in line with our corporate vision to improve the lives of all Sri Lankans through financial solutions. So hopefully, this will bring financial knowledge to all of you who have joined us here today. So some of you might be wondering what this term financial freedom is. It has various definitions, but what we're essentially looking at is basically creating yourself some sort of a cushion. Maybe you can even call it a safety net to live out a certain lifestyle independently. Maybe think of it as allowing yourself to live your life by freeing yourself from the burden of your everyday needs and efforts, while also gearing up for your future retirement plans. So during this session, we will be covering topics such as considering macroeconomics in financial decisions, managing personal finance, budgeting, and investment opportunities. Later on, we will have an informative Q&A session with our esteemed guest speaker, Manjula Mathews, the Deputy Chairperson of First Capital Holdings PLC and of First Capital Treasuries PLC. Yes. So to begin off, we first spoke to a couple of women. We had a sample of women and we spoke to them about essentially the financial struggles they would usually face. We came across various struggles, and these were 4 that we thought stuck out and was mostly common, if I may add. We got struggles on financing your education. This could be your own education. This could be your children's education, your higher studies. We also had situations on credit card debts, and we also had situations on barely being able to keep up with your savings because of inflation. And people also spoke of spending habits and how it would sometimes mess with their budgeting efforts. So we would go through this presentation and see how we can address these financial struggles and how we can make smart financial decisions. To start off on needs and wants, I know it's a pretty basic 2 words that all of us would have heard, but let me bring about a question that you should be asking yourself when you're making financial decisions. Always ask yourself before making a purchase, the purchase that you're going to make, is it a need or is it a want? How much of a value would this product add to your life? Is this product a real need in your life? Let's go over what is considered to be the basic needs in your life. This would basically be food, shelter, and clothing. We all know they are the essentials in our life, but let's look at how these essentials, how these needs could sometimes be impacted by our desires. For example, if you take a need such as food, you go to your supermarket, you do your weekly grocery shopping. That is you powering up and you're gearing up for your needs for that week, your needs that being food for the week. Let's look at how this need can be turned into a want through our desires. Say you're hanging out with your work buds and you're at work, and say you just go on we all know of Uber Eats, we all know of Pick Me Food, the delivery apps, right? We are all on our phones all the time. Maybe you would go on that and you would think, hey, I feel like getting something different today, and you would go and make a purchase on that. That would be where your need turns into a want. Even if you take an essential such as clothing, clothing is an essential, clothing is a need. But the moment you think you have to keep up with the trends, you have to maybe go to the most expensive boutique store in Sri Lanka or something as such, is where your need would turn into a want. So really ask yourself the question, is this a need or a want? And really, how much value is this product adding to your life? Moving on, another question that you could really be posing to yourself when you're making a financial decision is, how can you afford the life after the purchase? Let me bring this to you in an example. Say you're saving up to buy a car. You've saved up, you've hit the mark you wanted to save, and you're excited you buy the car. Now comes all the associated costs. This could come in maintenance costs. This could come in fuel cost. This could simply come in spare parts. Spare parts seem to be very expensive these days in Sri Lanka. How prepared were you to incur these costs? Did you account for these when you were accounting to buy the car? You should always ask yourself, can you afford the life after the purchase? A strategy going into this would be prioritizing your essential. And I mean, we are all human, we all have our wants. You shouldn't always say no to your wants. So maybe you should budget for your wants separately. We will come to the side of budgeting later on in the presentation. But your key takeaway should be to balance your essentials with desires for your financial well-being, and to not let your needs turn into wants due to your desires. And always remember, your life after a purchase should still be very comfortable. Moving on to the macroeconomic factors that could have an impact on your financial decisions. Three main macroeconomic factors are inflation, currency, and interest rates. If you look at inflation, inflation is basically the rise in prices. When the prices of your essential goods and services become more expensive, it reduces your purchasing power. When you look at currency, this mostly affects your imported goods. It could even impact expenses and savings when you convert them. And moving on to interest rates, it could influence your borrowing costs and affect returns and savings on your investments. So let's go through an example or two. When it comes to currency, read forecasts and make conversions accordingly. This could even be when you're making foreign education fees, when you're making foreign currency denominated payments. This could come in foreign education fees when you're looking at traveling overseas, when you're buying imported items. You would essentially want to make the payment at a favorable moment for you. For example, there's an example given where you would be paying 303 rupees to buy 1 USD versus where you'd be paying 295 rupees to buy 1 USD. You would, of course, prefer paying 295 to buy 1 USD. So always make timely decisions, read forecasts, familiarize yourself of the trends, familiarize yourself with all the forecasts out there, and make conversions accordingly. Even when it comes to interest rates, make use of low interest rates when you're in a need for borrowings, and always invest when interest rates are high. Have flexibility and always read your forecasts. You can always look at the trend lines in Sri Lanka of where the interest rates have been heading, have gone in the past, and where the forecasts are saying the interest rates will be heading. For example, when we're looking at inflation, say an individual earns 10,000 rupees, and you're looking at a basket of goods that are worth 10,000 rupees today. Take a scenario of 4% of inflation. In a year's time, this basket of goods worth 10,000 would essentially be 10,400 in a year. Can this individual that is earning 10,000 rupees or has 10,000 rupees in hand, can this individual now afford this basket of goods? He cannot. Even if the inflation keeps increasing and it hits a 6% mark, and the basket of goods is now 10,600, the individual will not be able to afford the basket of goods. Now let's take a scenario where the same individual would be making a smart financial choice of investing the said money. He is still earning 10,000, but he makes a choice to invest this in, say, an instrument that earns 5% interest rate. Take the scenario of a 4% inflation. The basket of goods will be 10,400 in a year's time, but since he has invested that 10,000 that he earns in a 5% yielding security, he now has 10,500 in hand. So he will be able to purchase that 10,400 worth basket of goods and still walk away with 100 rupees in his savings. But take a situation where the inflation of the economy hits a 6% mark. You invest at 5% and you walk away with 10,500 after 1 year, but now you walk away with 10,500 in 1 year, but now the basket of goods is 10,600. So essentially, you won't be able to afford as much as you did before. This is where your purchasing power reduces with inflation increasing. So keep an eye out for movements and inflation and interest rates. Invest and save in instruments that gives you flexibility to make decisions based on these changes. Let's look at really mastering your budgeting. Initially, you should be setting financial goals. And these financial goals could be in a horizon that fits you. It could be a weekly plan, it could be a monthly plan, it could be an annual plan. It could even be a plan that you set for yourself for the next 5 years. Maybe you have a big expense, a big sort of big goal that you have in the next 5 years that you really want to work towards, that you want to be financially independent towards. These budgeting techniques could help you. So initially set your financial goals, then comes identifying your incomes and expenses. And really sit through this, really think about all the incomes and expenses that could come up. Be realistic with it. And then you set your savings and investment targets. A common method of setting your savings and investment targets is the 50-30-20 budgeting rule. This would mean no matter how much you earn, no matter what your income is, you save 50% or you utilize 50% of your income for your needs, 30% of your income for your wants, and you always set aside 20% on investing. A common excuse people come up with is saying like, we're earning this much, we're earning X amount, and it seems low and everything. But if you have the discipline of this 50-30-20 rule, you would always know that you will set aside 50% since it's a percentage and not an absolute value of. That is why it's applicable for any amount that you could be earning. Set aside 50% for your needs, 30% for your wants, and always set aside 20% for investing so that you have something saved for a rainy day. Then comes the planning portion of the budget. You can do this in a numerous amount of ways. You could really look at grouping your expenses this could be utilities, housing, groceries, entertainment. This could really be adjusted and amended according to your lifestyle and the lifestyle you deem to have. And then comes the part where you track your expenses. You cannot simply make a budget and let it sit on the side. You have to track it. You have to track your expenses. And we're always on our phones. We're always on the go. So there are so many apps that you can use to monitor or track your expenses, such as Splitwise and Wallet. And these are just 2 examples. There are so many out there. So as you go on, you regularly review and adjust your budget. Never, as I said, never let it sit on the side. If it's a yearly budget, if it's an annual budget, maybe a month into the budget, you review it. You see if you actually did stick to your expenses, if you did actually stick to your investment quotas, if you did actually stick to your percentages in the 50-30-20 budgeting rule. Review it and adjust your budget accordingly because there are unexpected costs that could come up. So now that we've gone through budgeting and now that we've gone through needs and wants and identifying your needs and wants, let's look at some diverse investment options that are out there for you. First off, we have unit trusts. These are pool investment opportunities, pool investments that are managed by professionals and fund managers. And this really diversifies your risks across a multiple set of assets. Then you have government securities. These are considered to be low-risk investments issued by the government, and this includes treasury bills, which are short-term, and treasury bonds, which are long-term. Then you have your equities, which are considered to be high return and high risk. These are basically shares of company stock. Then you have your corporate debt, which includes commercial papers, securitized papers, debentures. And these are basically securities issued by corporates looking at raising funds. And these are considered to be medium risk. You also have real estate. You have real estate options such as land, housing, and apartments. Let's really look at unit trusts. Unit trusts are a pool of investments. Let's take three people. One person has 500 rupees, another person has 1,000 rupees, and another person has 1 million rupees. If the person with 500 rupees attempts to invest his money, he might not be faced with attractive returns. Say he goes to a financial institution and looks at investing in an FD with 500 rupees or just any low amount you could think of. But he would essentially not get an attractive return as the person who would go to the same financial institution with 1 million in hand. The interest rates they receive from the financial institution would be different. But say these three individuals with 500,000 and 1 million approaches a unit trust or invests in a unit trust. This pool of funds will be taken in by the fund managers and be allocated into certain securities. And the fund managers will be having the upper hand to receive higher interest rates and higher market rates from financial institutions and securities. So each investor has a claim to the pool in the proportion they have invested, and the money they have invested would be then invested in equity or fixed income. The advantages of a unit trust would be your liquidity because you could withdraw your money conveniently. And you could start with any small capital, even as small as 1,000 rupees. You have less risk due to diversification because unit trusts would be investing in multiple securities. And unit trusts are always managed by professionals, and they do the research and they do the investment on behalf of you. So important facts to remember would be investing does not require large sums. You can start small and always build big. Do not hold back thinking you don't have a big enough capital to invest. Every penny counts. Even if you start with 1,000 today, you can be building onto something bigger for tomorrow. So always start small and build big. And have patience. Let your money work for you. You invest and let the interest do its thing and do its work for you. And always pay attention to macroeconomical factors. Always know where the interest rates are heading, always know where the inflation is heading, and always have an idea about the currency rates if you're looking at foreign denominated payments. And think beyond saving and invest in flexible instruments.
Thank you, Thinuri, for that excellent introduction to investing and for sharing how this is part of First Capital's vision of improving the lives of all Sri Lankans through financial services.
So we have Manjula Mathews for an informed Q&A session. Manjula has over 3 decades of experience in finance, marketing, and general management, both in Sri Lanka and the United Kingdom. She is currently the chairperson of First Capital Treasuries PLC, and she is the deputy chairperson of First Capital Holdings PLC. She also serves as a director of Janashakti Limited, the parent company of First Capital Holdings PLC. So we have a prepared set of questions for Mrs. Mathews. We will get on to that now.
So if I could start with a small introduction. So Thinuri, you've covered some of the aspects of investing and providing financial freedom. And this session also covers breaking stereotypes. And I'd like to just talk about some of the challenges. So the reality is that in Sri Lanka, women don't have equal access to resources and opportunities, and this includes access to financial services. And that's because gender inequality is an it's an ongoing issue in Sri Lanka, just as it is in other parts of the world. And this inequality has actually affects our ability to progress both socially and economically. Female participation in our workforce is low, and increasing this participation will actually help the country by growing our GDP and just growing our economy. So I'll tell you how low it is. Sri Lanka participation in the workforce is just 32%. That's the female participation. Male participation is 72%. Now, when you think about it, our literacy rates are really high, and women and men both complete lower secondary school at about the same rate. Sri Lanka actually has one of the largest gender gaps in the world. And women, particularly those in lower and middle income, are in what we call vulnerable employment. Why am I talking about this? Because all of this affects a woman's ability to stands in the way of financial freedom. So when women are in vulnerable employment and they don't have structured work arrangements or any safety nets to guard against economic shocks, they are more likely to fall into poverty, and this obviously affects their ability to save. Women also spend a lot more time than men on unpaid domestic work and care of children, parents, etc. at home. So all of these limit a woman's earning and saving potential, and it therefore impacts our ability as women to attain financial freedom. So for example, women have as many bank accounts as men in the country. And you may think at first glance that, oh, things look good. But actually, women are less knowledgeable about investment options. So this seminar is actually a wonderful initiative to increase that knowledge base amongst women. I'll hand back to you, Thinuri.
Thank you for that insight, Manjula. Next question for you would be, what is your vision for women in Sri Lanka? How do you think our policies should be changed to improve and make women more financially free?
So I like what you're doing here, because my vision is that women become more savvy at how they spend, and you have done an introductory session on that, and also how we save. However, a big part of getting there actually requires changes in policy. Although women make up more than half of the population, we really need reforms that support women because women are disadvantaged for some of the reasons I already outlined, and I'll just share with you a few more. For example, land ownership practices work against women. Only 16% of land in Sri Lanka is owned by women, which means then that affects a woman's ability to borrow, for example, because she might not have collateral to give. Inheritance practices invariably favor men over women. So I would like to see reform that evens out this inequality. I'd like to see policies that encourage women to start up businesses, encourage them even to start businesses from home, essentially recognizing that many women don't have the advantage of being able to go out to work because of factors that inherently limit a woman more than a man. One important issue I want to mention is maternity pay practices. The way it works in Sri Lanka is that it really disadvantages women. And for women or women of that age to get back to work, it's important that long-term, the government looks at subsidizing maternity pay costs. Because if the state were to do that, that would then encourage employers to employ women because employers don't have an additional cost of maternity pay by employing women. Other policy changes, policy reform could include providing skills to women who want to go back to work after a break, perhaps English language training, IT training, improving digital literacy. That might even help them to start their own businesses, as well as policies that within a work environment have woman-friendly practices, a place where women can work, freedom from sexual harassment, places that provide childcare, flexible working practices. There's a lot of things that we can do to enhance working conditions for women and really provide an environment in the country where women can thrive. When women are able to go to work, this means that they have access to finance and are then able to use some of the information you provided, Thinuri, in a way that benefits them long term.
Thank you for that, Manjula. Another question to you would be, what examples or practical approaches can you tell based on your experience for the women to achieve financial freedom?
I think you spoke about some of them, but I think it's important to actually do this intentionally, to think about long-term and short-term goals. You spoke about perhaps saving for a child's education, but I would say to actually think about how do I want to use my money this year? Do I want to go on a holiday, for example, and save up for that? We often have a habit of falling into debt in order to fund expenses and then thinking about paying debt later. So I would say to be intentional about planning, about having financial goals and how finances are used. This would include planning funds if you want to send a child abroad. I see far too often that there is a lack of planning in our culture. People don't plan for how they're going to educate their children or how they're going to fund an emergency. Again, that requires planning. That money is kept aside, for example, to meet an emergency medical expense or some other expense that might that can happen. In terms of practically applying some of what you said, we need to understand our risk tolerance. For example, you shared about investing in shares. it's not something that you want to go in blindly. You need to understand that shares can go up as well as down. You can make money as well as lose money. You should also think about how long you can do without the money. That might help you put money away long term rather than just putting it short term. So if, for example, you know that you're saving, using the example you gave for a child's school fees, and you might want to put it away for some years, you know you don't need it, then you might be able to benefit from better interest rates because you are decided that you want to invest long term. It's also good to think about what do I need, when do I need it, how can I best save for those opportunities. Think about, do you like to be an active investor or a passive investor? Depending on what sort of personality you have, you may lean towards one or the other. You spoke about unit trusts. So unit trusts allow a person to invest in either stocks or other investments, which perhaps if they're a passive investor, they don't really have the inclination or the energy to do on their own. I would also say practically, don't be afraid to ask questions. No question is a dumb question. If you have money, you want to invest, shop around, call different people, ask the questions if terms don't make sense to you, and ask the question again if you still don't understand. Because ultimately, it's your money. And if you want to make the best decision for yourself, I would encourage you to shop around financial providers, speak to friends, family members, perhaps who are more savvy at investing before you put your money in something that you might feel unsure of later. I would also say another part of educating yourself is now there is just so much information available on the internet. Okay, all of it may not be good information, but if you are intentional about how you save your money and plan for your future, then do the research, find out what sort of different investment options are, build on what Thinuri has shared here so that you can be more financially aware.
Another question I'd like to pose to you, Manjula, is how should we as an entity, how could we as an entity help women to start investing? And who do you think who else should be playing a role in this?
When we as an entity, do you mean as First Capital?
Yes, ma'am.
So I love that you're having this program and that it's targeted at women and it's aimed at increasing the knowledge amongst women on investing. I would say having more education sessions like this, perhaps taking one basket of what you shared, whether it's unit trust or equity, and having more in-depth sessions that educate women would be great at just increasing that general literacy level.
Can you speak a little bit more on balancing work and life for women? Your thoughts on it, maybe your personal experiences on it?
Short answer is very hard, right? Having done it myself, I can say that is one of the biggest challenges that women face, and that is why women need support in being able to do this. And perhaps I'll talk about the support. I spoke about some of the challenges just facing our country with low female participation, and the reason for this is the lack of support. Now we can look at support on different levels. I spoke about support from the government in terms of policy and reform. What about companies? Companies can also help with advancing the careers of women. Often it's just when women have started work, gone some way up their career that this just seems the right time to have a family, and then you end up either leaving the workforce and having this gap, or then struggling to balance a demanding career as well as a family. And as a woman, I know that that's a difficult thing to do, and it can just be very guilt-inducing if you're leaving a child at home and choosing to go to work. So a company can help by providing flexible working practices, providing the ability for women to work at home. And I know because of COVID, almost many of these practices got introduced by default because we didn't have much of a choice than to work at home. And many companies, including our own, have continued to offer those choices to women and men. But do we make it okay for women to bring their child to work? Do we make it okay for them to say they have to leave on time because they've got to pick up their kids? So companies, organizations can create an environment that is enabling for women, that they don't have to feel lesser than because of the choices they have to make because they are balancing. And mostly it's the women who are balancing family with work. But this is actually, as I said earlier, this is a good choice for the country because it will help grow our economy if we have more women staying in the workforce after marriage and after having children. So that was about companies. But another important factor that I found helpful in my life is, and I'm sure it's the same for most women, is having a supportive family. It's hard to do it if you don't have supportive family as well as a supportive organization. So you need, I would say, a network of support, like a supportive spouse, a mother-in-law thrown in, perhaps an aunt, all of them helping with childcare really eases the burden of a woman going into work. More broadly, it's also important at many levels to address patriarchal attitudes and behaviors that hold women back. This is in the home as well. What do our boys and men think about, believe about their mothers or their sisters in terms of their future, whether it's in employment or elsewhere? What do we do to address in the workplace bias, unconscious bias, as well as conscious bias is alive and well? Statistics show, for example, that male managers tend to hire fewer women than female managers. And we have to recognize that there are issues, and organizations must address these intentionally. We can't assume that all is well and good, but we've got to acknowledge that there are issues, and we've got to create environments that are enabling for our female employees.
Thank you so much for that, Manjula. I think we have participants who are probably working would have found that really insightful. I would actually like to invite our participants to forward any questions that you might have for Manjula Mathews. And in the meantime, Manjula, I'd like to ask you, you spoke of women's representation. Have you seen any changes in, this could be changes in attitudes, changes in policies even, anything significant that kind of shows that we are on the right track?
Yeah. So on some level, I see that, Thinuri, in the sense of we have more flexible work practices that are enabling for women. But when we look at the larger numbers, we see that actually female participation in the workforce has reduced in 25 years. It's gone from a little over 40% to the 32%. And which is discouraging because we want to, as a country, encourage female participation in the workforce. So we make up half of the country, but there's only 32% of us actually in the workforce. In addition, at senior management levels, participation of women is even lower at 25%. Now, there could be many reasons for this, including women leaving the workforce in order to bring up their families. So I'm not suggesting that it's bias alone that causes that, but there's just a whole host of factors, many of which that I have already spoken about here. So when you look at the statistics alone, it's hard to say you're on the right track. But when I look at personally some of the things that I see in the organizations and perhaps the more progressive organizations, you can see that they are really wanting to make that change to create better working, make their workplaces more positive for their female employees.
Yes, thank you for that, Manjula. I think what you highlighted on what it could be and what kind of a future outlook we could have, I think it's really important. Even what you spoke of, more senior positions being held by women and all, it's always a pleasure to see that. If we don't have any further questions from the participants, any final notes from you, Manjula?
I can see one question that's there. How do I locate and identify noteworthy unit trusts? Are there specific websites or locations for this? So actually all of the unit trusts, you get details of all of the unit trusts in the newspaper every day, including First Capital Zone. And so you can see the names of the companies there and you can call them up. And I would encourage you to shop around, look at rates. Don't be afraid to ask the questions that help you make the best decisions.
Yes, like Manjula highlighted previously as well, no question is considered dumb. Like, you should always make sure you ask your questions, familiarize yourself with the markets, and always gain that knowledge, because it could really be a stepping stone for you gaining your financial freedom. I don't see any further questions on the Q&A. We have another question. That says, it would be great to know the participation ratio of this webinar, men versus women. That could be a very interesting ratio to look at. We will publish that. We will look at that and give you a number later on. So any final notes from you, Manjula, before we wrap up this?
Just to thank you. And I like to think that this is a first step and that there will be more to come in actually educating women to be better investors.
Thank you so much, Manjula, for joining us here today. And thank you so much for all the participants for joining us. And we really hope there was some sort of a takeaway for you. And we hope you make smart financial decisions going forward. Thank you so much.